Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nice to Meet You. This is your host, Simone, and this is a podcast of conversations with friends and strangers where we talk about life and lessons learned along the way. Today, we have a very special episode. It is the first panel episode, and we will be talking about podcasting. We have with us Ronald, Keith, and Isabel, and if you guys could introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about your podcast.
Are we going in order of introduction? Okay, I'm Ronald Young Jr. I am the creator and producer for Oats Big Round Studios, which has two podcasts, which I host, Leaving the Theater and Time Well Spent.
Nice. I'm Isabel. I'm a co-host of the I'm the Villain podcast, which talks with millennials about various ways that we're changing norms and generally trying to fuck up society. So that's my podcast.
I'm Keith Cheney. I am co-host of the Saved-ish podcast. We just talk about being young, Christian, and imperfect. So kind of that millennial fucking everything up, but in the Christian world.
So how did you guys decide to start a podcast? What was I guess your inspiration?
Yeah, I basically started it for two reasons. One, because I came up with the name and I was like, I have to use this name for something. And the second reason was because I was doing it as kind of a test run with this person I was going to start a business with, to be like, okay, let's do a mini project first to see if we work well together. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of how my podcast was born.
And for me, so I listened to a bunch of podcasts and I felt like this space was missing, but also I just had a bunch of issues that I have with my faith that I wanted to kind of talk about and sort out, and there was no real platform to do so. And I actually spoke to my pastor about it, and he was like, you should do a podcast, let me know what you need, and then it happened from there.
I did radio. I started with radio back in the day. I was an intern for Hot 99.5, and I always wanted to host my own show. And then the podcast boom kind of came along at the right time, mm-hmm. and I had a good idea and a good name, and decided to go from there.
Okay. Do you guys feel like podcasting is too saturated?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
I know a lot of people.
That's it. Okay.
A lot of people I know have podcasts or have ideas for podcasts, but I try to tell them just not to let that be a deterrent that there are so many, because for me at least, even if nobody listened to the episodes we've made, I've benefited from having the discussions. So I try not to focus too much on the numbers and the reach. You know, while we would like it to be bigger, I'm just glad that I get to have those therapy sessions with some of my friends.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think that I don't really feel like it's saturated because I'm not really treating it like it's a product that I'm trying to get the maximum. I'm not trying to optimize my exposure or anything. I'm just kind of doing it for fun. So for me, I feel like I would rather have as many people podcasting as possible.
Yeah, I said yes because, and I want to clear, I didn't say if it was good or bad, but movies, music, and television are all oversaturated as well. So I think people look at podcasts and like, oh, everybody has a podcast. I'm like, everybody has a mixtape.
You found one you like.
Yeah, exactly. And the cream seems to rise to the top. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, and we haven't really seen how far that can go yet with podcasting because it's still a relatively new industry.
Mm-hmm. What is your goal behind podcasting? You were saying, well, Isabel was saying, I guess I have to say that because, I don't know. Okay. Anyway, do you guys have monetary goals behind podcasting, or is it just kind of for the conversation, or how do you look at, I guess, success behind your podcast?
For me, I think success looks a lot of different ways, but one of the biggest things is just kind of dispelling some of those images people have in their mind of what Christians look like and how they're judgmental and they pretend they don't have any flaws. Our podcast is super transparent. We talk about all the things we're dealing with, and we talk about some of the things that traditional Christians may believe or do that our generation may not be as receptive to, and kind of navigating what that looks like in terms of how do you have faith but also try to be a good person, try not to be judgmental. And then one of the biggest successes that we've had is one of my relatives who's never really gone to church heard about my podcast, and then a few episodes in, I noticed he was live streaming Bible study while I was watching. And so it's one person, it's not something that you would brag about in terms of numbers, but that connection was all I really wanted from the show, just to, introduce more people to the idea that like Christianity doesn't have to be a bunch of judgmental hypocrites.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, I think for me it's similar in the sense that we're not really trying to make it a big money-making thing. We're really just trying to use it as a way to kind of get to know more people in DC and also be a model for trying to have conversations with people who disagree with us, because I think both my co-hosts and I feel like that's a pretty big issue in America and like right now especially. So we're just trying to further that cause of like just trying to talk to people who are different from us, right?
We can do a whole episode about that. I think for me, eventually I'd like to make money. I think the whole point of setting up, a studio concept is being able to not only be creative and make projects that I'm passionate about, but also help other people make projects that they're passionate about, and also take advantage of some of this corporate greed, because there's a lot of corporations out there that are trying to make podcasts, don't know how, and would outsource it in a heartbeat. So being able to have the expertise and know how to do it is put you in an advantageous position.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, like investing in this equipment, and so Isabel, when I went over to your house, I was like having some recording issues here, so we had to go over to her house and record. And I saw like her mic setup, and that kind of like was what inspired me to like, go further. Like, she got the Joe Rogan mics, and I was like, okay, like step up my home studio. So
Stunt.
Yeah. Why do you guys think so many people resonate with podcasts? Like, what do you think it's such a popular medium?
Making them or listening to them?
Listening to them.
I think the barrier to entry for both making and listening to them is very low now, because everybody has a smartphone. You could be listening to a podcast in under 30 seconds once you download an app. And then making them is also pretty easy. And you don't really need a lot of the things that the top podcasts have. You don't even need like a fancy mic or anything like that in order to create a podcast. And somebody will listen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that in terms of the barriers to entry, because there's so many people who commute and, who are, listening to podcasts at work. It's just a really easy thing to have going on in the background, like while you're cooking or something, and it's just a very easy thing to do, I think, from a listener perspective.
Yeah, like I said, it's free to listen, so you don't have that monetary commitment. But then also, I think we're just a very opinionated generation. And so it's nice to kind of hear people that, have similar opinions or different opinions, just to kind of help you to kind of evolve as a person. Like, I listen to Joe Budden and his friends twice a week, and I feel like I'm just sitting with my friends and I'm talking back to them sometimes. And it's dope to have that, while I'm working out or something, versus music every time. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, music is trash. Listen to podcasts.
Wait a minute.
Just kidding, music is dope.
So what are some of your goals for your podcast this year?
I've been really bad about promoting it. Like, we really only promote on Instagram, so I'm really trying to get it on other types of platforms. I'm trying to get it on YouTube, put more things on Twitter, like just get more. Like, there's a lot of people using Pinterest to promote their podcast, so I'm just trying to basically focus on getting more content on more platforms.
Yeah, definitely more effective promotion. Everybody that listens to it, or at least that talks to me after they listen to it, they seem to enjoy it, but I'm struggling to get people to share the content that they like, so we can get more ears. And then this year, I think, just because it's going to be such a crazy year with the election coming up, I want to kind of tackle some of those issues and just that whole label of like the evangelical vote and the evangelical outlook on a lot of issues, because I think that turns a lot of people away from religion, whereas I don't know that most people that identify as Christian align with a lot of those beliefs.
Yeah.
I routinely forget that it's an election year, but I also have forgotten that it's also an Olympic year, which a lot of people have forgotten as well. It's a big year in general.
I forgot all about that.
I think for this year, last year my goal was to do a live show, which finally pulled off. Live show number 2 is already booked for this year, so I'm excited about that. And generally, there's a couple of big swings I wanted to make with Time Well Spent in terms of the type of subject matter I'm covering. So I want to do a couple big series on big questions that I have, and one of them's coming out later this year, hopefully in the first quarter. That's kind of what I'm shooting for. So goals wise, that and the live show, and I think promotion can always be improved. Mm-hmm. So I think people think that there's a place you get with promotion, and you're just always promoting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough thing. That's definitely a tough thing. And with promotion, I feel like podcasting has so many different roles, and you kind of have to like be like a marketing person too. And how many different roles do you guys play in your podcast? Like, how many different jobs have you taken on? Because like, you know, there's like graphic designer, audio engineer. What different roles do you guys play?
I do all of it.
Yeah, I do all of it.
Yeah.
I do everything but editing the audio, but I do like the graphic design. I run our social media. I serve as a producer, kind of getting the episodes and the topics ready and dealing with guests. So yeah, pretty much everything except behind the computer, which I think I may end up having to learn this year. So
You definitely gotta learn that. It's, I feel like if for anybody, like for people that are trying to get started, I feel like the basics again are just recording and then uploading. But the one thing that'll make your podcast better than others is any form of editing. If you have somebody that does it, that's fine.
yeah, we have somebody.
But if you're doing it, I mean, if you can do it yourself, it's a skill set. It's invaluable, and you can offer it to other people, and it's something that's always useful. But yeah, the jack of all trades if you're gonna start.
Yeah, and it's fun to learn too.
Yeah.
I think it's the information is out there, right? You don't have to like pay to go to these like fancy podcasts. You don't have to go to Salt or Transom or anything to like learn how to do audio editing. So I would say if you're starting a podcast, it's definitely valuable to learn. But yeah.
So what are some of the challenges you guys have had with doing your podcast?
Getting people to take me seriously. Like you say, I got a podcast, and it is like saying I got a mixtape because you got to convince them to listen to it. I think I run into the same problem Keith has with trying to getting someone to say yes, I listened to it, and yes, I liked it, but would you share it? Tell somebody else. Like I've seen so many people. They'll post on Facebook, hey, what is some of y'all's favorite podcasts? And I know people that listen to my podcast that know it is good, that are still like, the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm like, they don't need to know about the Joe Rogan podcast. They need people to listen to them. Tell them about Time Well Spent. So like, try to get people to share about it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the most tricky part.
Yeah, I agree with that. That really resonates with me. And also just coming up with different, topics to talk about, right? I mean, eventually, once you've done enough episodes, you're like, okay, we've talked about capitalism, and it's especially because there's a lot of topics that, especially from my show, which is kind of about the topics that millennials are thinking about, we're all kind of grappling with a lot of the same issues, so like, how do you make it fresh? And also just thinking more about like what, for me, it's because I started last year, it's been a lot about just figuring out what level of, how much editing is over editing, like what sounds like, because there's this line between feeling authentic, right, and like unedited, right, versus feeling like something is just like actually really well produced and like quality, and it's really hard to, I think, find that line, because there's tons of YouTubers and there's tons of like other creators that I think really have promoted this sense of, the more raw it is, the more authentic it is, and people are really drawn to that.
Before you respond, sorry, Keith, I will say about that though, what people don't realize is how good editing can make stuff seem that way raw. Right. You know what I mean? And a lot of people don't recognize that, and I think because you can't, there's like clips I've listened to where I'm like, that's edited? And they're like, yeah, and it's just a matter of like having the right tape, being able to put it together, and like just silence this, put the silence in here and all that stuff to make it sound as raw as possible. But really you just inserted a laugh where there was none before, and now it sounds, more raw. So I feel like my emphasis is always on editing, but I understand what you're saying, like over editing is an issue. Cause
right, it's like, should I take out every single like and every single and every single weird breath?
Yeah, do you need to? Like, no, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a podcast if I took that. But to that point, I think just in looking at the overall production of the show, how long is the right length? How should we maybe switch the format up for different topics? How do we incorporate listeners? Like this past season, we started to record listener questions, bring those in. Where do you put those in where it's organic and it feels like the right spot? And then just because of the topic or the nature of our podcast, I have to worry about church folk. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my opinions aren't very popular at my church, so I'll say something behind the mic being transparent, and then some of the usually older members of the church, like I just kind of feel a little tension, or they're like, oh, I can't believe we did an episode about homosexuality, and not everybody was a fan of it, but I don't care. So just juggling that while not making it about me and being respectful, to what the core beliefs are. So yeah, it's.
Can I say one thing about that? So I'm a junior pastor in my church, and time well spent. Sometimes I just I do the same thing where I'm transparent. But I've gotten to a place where I'm just I really want to be the same person all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm tired of trying to hide this piece of me when I'm with church folk, this piece of me when I'm with my non-religious friends, this piece of me and I feel like the best part about having a podcast in general is just being able to be your authentic self. Yeah. Not having to be on or create some caricature of yourself, right. Which in some cases you have to do for a podcast. But I feel like in the types of ones that we all have, that's not really necessary.
Yeah, I've made a similar kind of commitment to that level of transparency. But you get me behind the mic, we have this last season was cuffing season. So all we talked about was relationships and sex and all that stuff. So I talked a lot about the trash version of me, when I was younger and I was just wilding out.
So 2 minutes ago.
No, 3. But you tell that stuff. It's easy to say behind the mic, but then you see remember the church and oh, you was out here living them. Yeah, about that. Don't act like you weren't either. That's the thing. It might have been the 80s or 70s for you, but we all had a youth in the past, so it was, keep it on it.
Yeah, I agree with especially what Ronald is saying, because I was actually talking to my friend Shane earlier about being the same person. I've made a conscious effort to try and make myself the same person for all these different groups in my life. So one way I did that also was making my Instagram and my Twitter the same handle, because I used to have different handles for everything, but keep it consistent. That's just one conscious way that I started that.
Do you share it with your coworkers?
No.
Okay. Oh no, I don't do socials. That's what I'm talking
about. One time I made Facebook friends with somebody at work, and something happened at work, because I talk about my coworkers. I think we all do. Well, I do. I won't speak for y'all. And one of my coworkers stood up at her desk and was like, "Ronald, I didn't see that thing you said." I was like, "What thing?" "That thing you said about your coworker and blah blah blah." And I immediately blocked her. I was getting her right in front of her, and "That's what I'm talking about. That's why I can't be friends with y'all."
Yeah, I did the same. I share a lot of mine with people at work, and I have people from work on my podcast, and I work in a very corporate environment, and so I do podcast episodes about non-monogamy and my sex life and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, okay." So you can definitely be separation of church and state a little bit,
And people just need to stop pretending.
Yeah.
That they don't have to, everybody likes sex. Let's just get that out of the way. And
that's a whole episode for real, man. In general, I've had this argument with people porn is $1 billion industry. So I'm I know y'all are watching porn. Y'all can say you're not, but I know y'all
3 of the top 10 websites on the internet are porn.
Yeah.
People are clicking.
So what's your favorite part about podcasting? Why do you guys like to do it?
We're not talking about porn anymore. I think my favorite part about podcasting or the part that I feel the best about is when you've done all the editing, you've done all the mastering, and you click upload and it goes up and you just wait for reactions. I feel like that there's a point there where I feel there's so much pride that comes with putting out that episode and being done with it and saying now this is out into the world and now I get to get feedback. And so I feel like somewhere between putting it out and feedback is my favorite portion about podcasting.
I like listening to the sound of my own voice.
Me too. Oh my God. I hate my voice.
You hate it?
So just to get the stream, I'll play my podcast, but then I'll turn it down.
Really?
I don't want to hear it. I'm all right, I know what I said I was there, but I don't want to hear my voice. But I got the stream though.
On some level, you gotta love your own voice. So on some level,
I love my own opinions. My voice, it's just okay. I think my favorite thing by far though is when I have moments on a podcast where I'll say something, in transparency, something that I'm kind of vulnerable about or I was worried about saying, and then the feedback will be "Yo, me too. I'm so glad you said that." Because on our podcast, I say all the time, I'm not all the way there where I don't have doubts about, whether or not there's a God or any of this stuff. And people at the church are like, "Yo, I didn't know you could say that." I'm like, "Yeah, man, we all go through these things, but there's so much that people don't want to talk about." And when I do that, I'm usually worried about how people respond, but it's always, "Yeah, man, I have the same issues." And so that's easily my favorite part.
Yeah, I think it's cool, like figuring out what ends up resonating with people because it's not always what I expect it to be, right? Often I'll put out an episode that I'm like, I didn't feel like this was that groundbreaking. I feel like I've had this conversation so many times with so many different people, but then someone, reaches out to me and was like, wow, like this was crazy, and I was like, oh, I guess someone actually thought that was like, was kind of fresh and interesting to them. So, I feel like you just never really know. Well, I feel like there's some things where you're like, okay, everyone is always gonna listen to the dating app episode or whatever, but people end up being interested in things that I think often surprise me.
Yeah, cool. How do you guys I wanted to bring up the fact that you make the podcast for your church and around your church members. Jesus Christ. Around your church members.
Very relevant. We talk about them sometimes.
Yeah, he's already the guest, right?
I guess Keith, you have your church members giving you feedback, so that's a really unique position to be in because for my podcast I get very little feedback, so it's just sometimes it's just shouting out to the universe okay, do you guys enjoy this or do you not? So I think it's really cool that you have that instant sort of feedback.
So it's good, but I think you also have to kind of play this game of what feedback is valid or what feedback should you actually take and incorporate, because a lot of it is just some people are used to things being done a certain way and they felt attacked by certain things that you said, so you try to maybe change the tone of what you're saying because of that, but you don't want to lose that authenticity. So the best feedback for me is just ideas about things you'd like to hear us talk about or things we may not have mentioned. But if you tell me you hate the episode or you disagree with us, I'm like, okay.
What else?
I'm not changing anything. So give us a 1 star if you feel that strong about it. It's cool.
So has podcasting changed how you guys talk? Just in general, has it affected you in that way?
I think you mean with people I know or people I don't know.
I guess either one. Well, I guess what Keith was saying about it's changed how he brings up topics or how he talks about certain things. Has it changed just your everyday kind of conversations that you have with people?
I think in a lot of ways I've grown because it used to be when I was getting into my podcast came out of getting into a lot of Facebook fights. Be like, oh, y'all must not understand me. I'm gonna make a podcast. So I was trying to figure out a way to become more articulate and make it so that people really understand what I'm saying. And when I speak, I typically use a lot of analogies, which irritates some people, but I feel like it's a good learning tool. So in terms of how I speak with people, I feel like I now look at everybody as a listener and everybody that I'm having conversations with as a listener. I'm a bit of an overthinker, so I think that that resonates a little bit, being able to be understood and let people understand me. But I think one of the biggest things is I really, if I put something in an episode about my life and when I see somebody, they don't know about something about my life. For instance, let's say I were having a kid, it'd probably be an announcement on the podcast or having a live show, anything like that. So if somebody says to me, says, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm about to have a kid. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. That's because you don't listen to the podcast.
You said you heard it.
Yeah, I thought you wasn't a listener. So, but yeah, other than that, I think it's just made me a little more articulate.
I feel like the more I am editing and the more experience I have in putting out episodes, the more I have this tendency to, while I'm actually recording a podcast with a guest, sort of be editing in real time and be thinking about oh, okay, maybe this part should be cut or this part should be more succinct, and it's really hard to kind of get yourself out of that and being actually actively engaged in the conversation and not try to think about all of these meta things going on in the conversation, because at the beginning I wasn't even aware of that stuff, but now that I have that experience, it's kind of oh, okay, I have to stop analyzing it in my head and just do the podcast,
Fair.
So I'm a consultant by day, so I naturally have to ask the right questions and get to the root of the issue. So that's been useful in the podcast, but I think just listening to myself when I actually do, I've just noticed little things that I do that probably aren't as useful, or I could have rephrased it. So that's helped me both in the podcast as well as just at work, just being a little more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you do podcasting that annoys you? Because for me, it's saying the word like. If I had $1 for every time I said like on Nice to Meet You, I could probably buy another house.
A friend of mine told me that I had high end terminals, which I didn't pick up on before. But it's basically where like every your sentences like go up at the end, and so now I'm hyper aware of that.
When you said it, you did it. And I was like, oh,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a name for that.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is like if we're like really in a conversation, we're like in a good part, everybody's comfortable, I might like make a little side joke, but I won't say it loud enough to where people hear it. And I'm like, yeah, like this. Everybody's like they'll keep talking, but I'll hear a podcast like, yeah, that sounds stupid. Nobody caught it, and I probably should have just listened at that point.
That's why y'all need headphones, man. So
Yeah.
catch those.
You gonna give us headphones?
I think, let's see, the most annoying thing I do, I think it's the same thing. It's mostly likes and ums, but I don't, now I'm super aware of it happening right now, but now I feel like I've gotten to a point where I can kind of hear myself and filter those out when I need to, which I think is really important, which is why I've grown to start liking my own voice and being able to hear myself and be able to edit that stuff out. But that's probably the most annoying thing I do. The other thing, actually no, this is the most annoying thing I do. I don't answer if you listen to my podcast from the beginning, I used to set this large theme question at the beginning and be like, and by the end of this episode, we're going to answer that question.
Never answer.
Never answer.
I don't make promises like that. We'll see what happens, man. I don't know.
But I was an idiot because I'm like, Ronald, if you wrote this and you're saying you're going to answer the question, you listen to it, you put it out, how did you not answer that question?
Yeah. I think also for me, at the very first episode I recorded, I was never aware of how much I interrupted people. And then as I was going back and editing the first episode, I was like, wow, I interrupted her almost every single sentence.
So as a podcaster, we're having conversations all the time. So there has to be one hill that you will die on, as far as an opinion that you have that you're not changing. So my hill that I will die on is that you should not play Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas before Thanksgiving midnight. That's a hill I'm dying on. That's the only hill I'm dying on. So do you guys have any like?
Oh, I thought you were talking. I was gonna say
no,
something.
it's kind of like a joke.
No, you better want a real one.
Yeah.
Because I think that women should. No, I'm just.
All right, y'all. This is cool up there. Got really hot, really quick.
Dangerous so fast.
Don't say that.
I was like, go on.
Glad you asked.
I was like, oh, we're going here.
Oh man, I think hills I would die on. I don't want to go first. I gotta think.
I was gonna do a serious one like fuck marriage or something like that, but like it's kind of like Mariah Carey.
Oh, we going there now. I'd love to hear that.
I mean, I could go into it.
Yeah, no, do it.
Marriage is an institution to own women. That's what it was created for. I don't think anyone can dispute that.
I'm not going to dispute it. I'll just say that's certainly an opinion.
I don't know that I agree, but okay.
Yeah. I'd like to unpack that. Put a pin in that for a different episode.
All mine are music related and they're really specific. Like I feel like AZ had the best verse on Illmatic, and nobody can change my mind about it. But that you'd have to know a lot of 90s rap to know why that's a big deal. Let's see. I think Boz is the best rapper on Dreamville. I don't know, somebody else go. I'll come up with a more mainstream.
I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know if this is the hill that I would die on. I feel like we're doing more unpopular opinions.
Yeah.
See, season 4 of The Wire is the best season of anything.
Is that with the kids?
Ever, yes.
Fair.
The school. Yeah.
Fair. No, that's fair. I can't think of, man, I wish you would have, this is homework.
I was debating between like, do I send out the questions or do I like just have it free form?
J-Lo isn't really good at anything. Even though I've heard a few people say this, but she's not really good at anything.
She's better at acting than she is singing. I don't care what anyone
says. But even that bar isn't very.
No, of course not. No,
just
this is a good podcast idea. I mean, I know we're dropping out of the conversation.
Unpopular opinion.
No. I'm thinking a hill you would die on.
Oh.
Just saying.
No, that is not, yeah.
I'm just saying.
I like this actually.
I'm just saying.
And bring your research.
Here's
my evidence.
Yeah.
I would like to co-produce, but you let me know when you're ready. We can do that right now. Go ahead.
I feel like the hill that you would die on is kind of an unpopular opinion, though. Like, I feel like
Okay.
it's not even. I don't think it's I don't think it's inappropriate to go for unpopular opinions, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, okay, if we're going there, the musician might stab me to death for this one. I think Prince is overrated.
Next question.
Have you ever?
That was worse than the marriage one.
Have you ever? Yes, it was. It was. I understand hers. Yours makes no sense.
You're married. You're actually married.
But I get the idea of it. I'm just saying. Historically, I can see why she might say that. There's nothing that will make that make sense. Have you seen him perform?
Yeah, he plays like every instrument. Doesn't do it for me, man. I'm sorry.
You should have kept going with the women thing.
I didn't know that was a safer space.
Terrible. So much respect for that.
So, what's your experience working with other podcasters? Have you guys networked at all across the podcasting realm?
Well, the podcast garage is open up in DC, and so I've been going to a couple of their happy hours, and so that's been really cool. But I do really like having other podcasters as guests on my podcast, because I do feel like there's some, you don't have to kind of teach people mic manners or any kind of things like that. And also, I just feel like people who have their own podcasts probably have them because they're opinionated and articulate, right? Or at least they've had practice, talking about stuff. So I feel like that's often a really good way to get guests, is to find people who have podcasts.
Yeah, they already have that presence established. Mm-hmm. I've had Ronald on my podcast. Obviously I've been on yours, and I found those conversations just flowed better. I didn't have to force it. All right, so next topic.
Yeah, totally.
It just kind of happened. Yeah.
I feel like so. I like working with everything work I've done with y'all has been great. I haven't been on I'm the Villain yet, so
come on.
I'm available. Anyway, but yeah, no, I love collaborations, especially with other podcasters. Can I ask a reverse question?
Yeah, sure.
Do y'all how do y'all feel about people who ask you to collaborate when their podcast is not good?
I don't care. I don't care if their podcast is good or not.
She just the sound of her own.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've run into the problem of people where it's been they want to do cross promotion, and I'm very protective. I'm very protective of the brand. You know what I mean? And I'm what I don't want to be in a situation is where I'm putting so much effort into something over somebody who's not putting the same effort in themselves. Yeah. And I feel like I've run into that a few times, and that's probably the only pitfall when it comes to working with other podcasters.
Yeah, I guess it's only if you see an appearance as endorsement. Mm-hmm. Because I might appear on your show, but I may not necessarily tweet about it or give it my stamp. I think it's kind of recommending somebody or putting somebody in your list of references. If you don't know that I love your work, don't put me, because I'm gonna tell them the truth.
Fair.
So yeah, I would probably do it if the topic was something I didn't mind talking about, but I'm not gonna tell everybody it's a great show unless I think it's a great show.
I think I would do it too, just for the experience, basically.
I feel like that Prince thing just really derailed.
Yeah, sucked a lot of air out of it.
Really sorry.
I just want to make you a playlist.
I thought this was a safe space. Apparently it's not. I'll take the playlist. I'm just saying.
What are some new things that you guys want to try? I guess kind of ask that question, but do you have any ways that you're trying to expand beyond your podcast? Maybe video instead of just audio, or different events that you want to throw?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So something we were just talking about is actually trading ad space on our podcast, so instead of money. So since a lot of us aren't actually making money yet, we'll record a 30-second ad, you do the same, we'll trade it, and we'll put it in the middle of our shows if we like it. And then you trade us 2 Instagram posts, we'll do yours. Just kind of some way where we can cross promote, and right in the middle of our show, maybe you give us the best 30 seconds of your favorite episode, and that may draw somebody in. So maybe we can help each other that way.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's fair. When are we doing that?
So what podcast are you guys listening to now? Obviously, nice to meet you, but
Yeah, I got a few. Pull up my list. Definitely Joe Budden, like I mentioned.
I can't listen to Joe Budden.
It's crazy because
I can't.
I listen to them talk for 6 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't think that anybody would be able to get me to do it. But it's like I said, it feels like you're in the room. They're talking about mostly stuff that I'm pretty interested in. And so they have a really good dynamic there. Like some people have tried to recreate it, and it's like Drink Champs, but they're drunk, and so after a while the conversation just gets stupid. So I do that. I do Gladwell's Revisionist History. Occasionally I'll do Jamel Hill's podcast. Occasionally I'll do Charlemagne and Andrew Schultz. Every morning I get my news from Upverse and the Daily. It's like 30-minute commitment, and I can feel kind of aware of what's going on in the world. Let's Talk Bruh, which is about like black masculinity. Some guys out of DC actually, and that one's pretty good.
Wow, you're a real listener.
Yeah. I like How I Built This.
That's a good one.
That
is
inspirational.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's so funny because Guy Raz does this thing where like every single time, he knows the entire story, and every time he's like, wow, you made $1 billion? Like, that's crazy.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't make $1 billion. Isn't that
They're looking at it like, yeah, guy, we talked about this like 2 minutes ago.
It's the criteria for being on the show.
Okay. I listen to Ezra Klein's show. I used to listen to Casey Neistat had a podcast with his wife called Couples Therapy, but then he just like stopped posting, and so he doesn't really do that anymore. But I listen to those, and I listen to Freakonomics. So those are my main ones.
That's what I started with. Was Freakonomics.
Yeah.
That was like my first podcast.
Yeah. Well, so him and like Ezra Klein and like all those people all have very similar voices. Like Guy Raz, they all have like extremely similar voices.
So you have a type.
Yeah.
I'm listening to. I'll pull up about it. I listen to Criminal is one of my favorites. I like How I Built This as well. Pop Culture Happy Hour, Reveal, The Daily, Every Day, Heavyweight. There's my friends at Radiotopia do one called Adult-ish, which I love that podcast. One of my favorites. Embedded. I like a lot of narrative podcasts. Like anything where you're telling me a story, you can pretty much suck me in.
Yeah.
Flies Fables. More Perfect is good. Still Processing is fantastic.
I do Still Processing.
Oh my god! And I get mad when they go on break. I'm like, there's always something to talk about. Don't go on break anymore.
They don't tell you all the time.
No.
Just do it.
And it's almost Oscar season. I'm like, I need y'all back.
Horrible Decisions is dope too.
Oh yes, I love that
If
show.
you're kinky.
So there's like a bunch of like Caught is a good one on WNYC. Dish City, which is local. It's really good because they go through the food in DC, and they've talked about jumbo slice. They've talked about half smokes. They talk about Ethiopian food. Listen to Dish City. It's really good. I was like,
I'll have to check that out.
yeah.
Can we
like,
agree mumble sauce is overrated?
Huh? Okay, no. And let me just say something. Okay, you know what? If we could just throw the whole Prince thing away, you know what the hill I will die on.
It's overrated.
Wait, what? You're saying it is?
Mumble sauce is overrated.
You're overrated, and Prince is overrated. I'm going back to that. How dare you?
Really?
Just like the
I
mayor.
feel like most people are like, I see what you're saying.
Not overrated. Are you from here?
No, I'm from Michigan.
That's fair. That's fair. If you're from here and you say it's overrated, it's overrated.
I have that same like blind loyalty to a place in Michigan called Big John's.
Yeah.
But somebody was like, yeah, this is just like a cheesesteak. Oh, damn, you might be right. But it's
Somebody-
ours. So
somebody
I think
know.
that's why mumble sauce is popular, because it's yours. But
Yeah.
it's just okay.
Hey man, all right. You like kept going with that sentence and it just didn't stop.
So the ones that I'm listening to are let's see, So Shameless, and then what is the other one? Oh, The Read, obviously. Everybody
Read's
has
fun.
listened to The Read. But I wanted to bring up something that you just mentioned, taking breaks. How do you guys like take breaks? How do you break up your seasons?
My breaks are naturally built in because my podcast is narrative, so there's a lot of editing and stuff that's go through a lot of thought process beforehand. So like I want to put out more episodes. I'd love if this were actually a monthly or a weekly podcast, but I have a full-time job. So unfortunately that sucks up a lot of my time. So it's really, there'll be a time where in a short period of time I'll put out 5 episodes, and there'll be a time where I'll go months without putting out an episode. So it kind of depends on like, I don't know how you work it. There's some people that have a cadence and they're able to do it every week. But it all depends on the format. Because if you're doing like a talk podcast, that's way easier to edit.
You don't have to edit.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're not, then it like that plays it factors in. And then if you want to when do you feel like you need to take a break? You know.
Yeah, for me, I basically scheduled them as 10 episode seasons, and then there's like a month in between each season. But we're really ahead of schedule. So right now we're basically like but right now we're recording the episodes that are coming out in March, and so eventually we might just stop having breaks because we're actually like we have enough episode content that we could just not have that break in between. I think so. That's the way I do it.
Yeah, we actually do theme seasons. So like last was cuffing season. This next one we're still figuring out what it'll be. It's like theme. It's like 8 or 9 per season. And for the first year, we actually did it around like college schedule because we have a lot of Howard students at our church. But this year, I don't know if we'll do the same thing. So we'll just see what works.
Do you guys let people know when you're taking a break, or just like, how do you handle that?
I just say, because it's like a thing that we've been doing, just like, yeah, this is the last episode of the season, catch us in March, whatever.
Yeah, same. Just say, we'll be back next season with something, and we don't tell them when because we don't know when.
So I feel like I've tried to do that, but it never works out for me. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be gone for 4 weeks, and I'll be back on that 5th week, and then like again, I have a full-time job.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to get that out of 5th week. So typically now my new sign off is time will be back. Time well spent will be back soon. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
And like soon could mean anything.
Follow us on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess the last question that I have is for people that are starting podcasts. What advice do you have?
I would say, your friends and like your family, they'll give you that like initial support just off the strength of the relationship, but figure out who your core audience is going to be and focus on them. Because like we saw crazy numbers like the first few episodes, but then we realized that's just because all our family's like, oh, Keith got a podcast, let me see what it is. And then, it kind of dropped off because it wasn't for everybody. So figure out who your audience is and have a decent social media strategy. It's like we try to make our Instagram layout pretty nice looking. So it's a good first impression.
I'd say just start. You're gonna be bad when you start, no matter who it is. If you go back and listen to the first episode of This American Life, it's not good. You can go back to the beginning of anything. It's gonna be bad, and then make improvements as you go. My goal was always just to make every episode I made better than the last episode I made, and if you can make that your goal of any podcast, then you'll be constantly improving. And before you know it, you'll really have a cadence and a rhythm into what you're going to. And also, YouTube University. YouTube University is the best college in existence. You can get anything you need with a YouTube video, anything that you're looking for, editing, advice on marketing, any of that stuff. You get all that on YouTube. Like you could find it on the internet somewhere.
Yeah, I just started watching YouTube actually because I don't have cable, so like I got bored of like watching Netflix, and like I got on YouTube. I was like, wait a minute, this has been here the whole time.
The whole time. That's actually their tagline. We've been here the whole time. Enjoy your Disney Plus.
I would say being judicious about the feedback that you take from people, because I think there's a lot of people out there who have their idea of what they think the best podcast, like what type of podcast they think that people are interested in. Like a lot of people would give me feedback being like, hey, like you need to disagree more, there's not enough like disagreement happening, right? And me and my co-host sat down and was like, okay, but like, do we think that that's actually really like what we're trying to do here, or are we trying to do something else, right? And so I think that there'll be lots of different people with lots of different visions of what they think about makes a good podcast. And I think it's also, it's good to have feedback, but it's also good to kind of have a sense of like, okay, but what's my vision of what I want this to be,
I actually want to ask that question. What do you guys think makes a good podcast?
I don't think there's one answer for that,
Yeah.
because it's so subjective. Because I'm like, there's people that don't like chatcasts, there's people that don't like narrative ones, there's people that don't like experimental, there's people that don't like fictional, and all of those exist and they all have fan bases. So I feel like to ask that would be like to say, what's the best movie?
Yeah.
I feel that.
I think there are some like overarching traits to like consistency, because we've had some issues with releasing like on the same like schedule that we sought out to beforehand. So like we were trying to do like every other Thursday, and then between episodes we would do like our pastor's feedback or kind of biblical thoughts on the episode. But people got frustrated because they didn't know when we were going to drop. So I think just little things like that to where they don't have to, I guess, deal with not having you there when they wanted you to be there. Like I know Joe wasn't going to be there for me on Wednesday and Saturday. So when I go to the gym on Wednesday, I don't even have to think about it. It's there in the morning. That is just valuable for the listener. Otherwise, they'll have to, did it drop on Saturday? I had a lot of stuff to do. By Monday, I forgot about it. And you missed that listen. So.
Yeah. I would say that the thing for for me that I've been trying to emphasize is getting people to tell concrete stories as opposed to being like, oh, I just think this and saying it in very general terms, because the thing that people will remember is always if you have a story with concrete details in it, that's always going to be the most memorable thing, right? So trying to frame questions and, you know, just have guests who will have interesting stories to tell, because for me, that's for the podcast that I listen to, it's always like, oh wow, the thing that resonates with me is always people having like these really crazy stories, and that's what I always remember. So I think focusing on storytelling is really key.
Cool. Do you guys have anything else that you just want to mention, bring up about podcasting? Because I have questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's, don't let the saturation scare you. I think we covered that. I would say don't let any, like, whatever barrier to entry you have. I mean, again, with podcasting, it's so low. You technically you don't even need a mic. If you have a computer that records, you can just start a podcast right there, you know, and get over whatever ideas you need to go ahead and start it. I mean, it's a brand new year. Now's the time. You know what I mean? You're about to get your tax return, buy the equipment, do what you got to do. You know, like don't let anybody stop you from doing something if this is like your dream and you really want to do it.
I think one thing that's also really cool is the ways, because it's kind of new, ways that different podcasting communities are cropping up and like the different conferences. And, you know, in DC, I think that DC is really revving up in terms of people actually like, you know, like doing this kind of stuff and knowing other podcasters, because I think that kind of community and like being able to meet other people who are interested in this thing is really valuable. So
I actually met, oh, Jesus Christ, okay. I actually met all of you guys at the PRX Podcast Garage, so like that's, yeah, the community, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think that I really hope that there ends up being like more spaces like that.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they're getting bigger. That's their first space,
Yeah.
their second space next year. Pumped.
Yeah.
Actually, that's this year. Yeah, pumped.
I think I would just say don't get discouraged if the numbers aren't what you would think they would be or what you want them to be. Just keep making content. It'll keep getting better, and then people hear about it and the numbers will do better. So.
It's also crazy to see if you're on one of those apps that shows you where people are listening. To be like, whoa, there's just some random person in Kuwait listening to my podcast.
14 countries. I'm like,
yeah. It's like, where are these people getting that? Like, where's this coming from?
You also would be like, really though? Like Singapore, like,
did you accidentally press the button?
Yeah. Did you listen to the whole thing?
How did this person find this?
It was really cool when I first released my episodes because my friend Shane, he was in Australia. So he was like listening to the podcast in Australia. So it's like, oh, I have listenership in Australia. It's like for 1 week.
But that's another thing. Use the analytics that are available. Because like what we found is like there would be a drop off toward the end of the episode. So what we decided we'll probably do is move like the things that we think are most important toward the front. So that even if they don't make it through the end of the episode, they at least got to take away what we wanted them to get. Mm-hmm. So just use those. And then like the age of demographics, the gender demographics, those will help you to kind of market toward, the audience that you already have.
So yeah, do you guys want to, I guess, plug your podcast, social media, sign off with whatever you want to share?
Sure. My podcast is I'm the Villain. You can find us at I'm the Villain Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and it's also our Gmail. So yeah, just check it out.
We're Save Dish Pod on Instagram and Twitter. We also have a Save Dish discussion group on Facebook. Although a lot of like older people join and it's not as fun anymore. we're gonna do something about it.
Definitely want to join that one down. At Owitz Big Ron, that's at OHITSBIGRON. You can find all updates about my life and about both the podcast and about Owitz Big Ron Studios. Oh, come to the live show October 2nd, 2020. I don't see anybody writing that down, so I'll send you guys all an email. October 2nd, 2020.
Yeah, like October, dang.
Wow.
I'm not playing games. Save the date. Y'all have nothing to do. I know you don't.
Only 10 months ago, so
exactly. So see you there October 2nd, 2020 at the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia.
Cool. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate you helping with my first panel. Hopefully next time my voice will sound better. But if you guys would like to follow the podcast, you can do that at NTNY Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. If you would like to subscribe to the podcast, you can do that on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, or just something that you want to share, then you can send those emails to ntnypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next week.
The F word.
Oh, snap.
Which is interesting because we all know what war we're talking about.
Yeah,
But it's not fuck.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
So my friend,
Because fuck is fine now.
Yeah.
They say fuck on BET now.
I have a friend that uses the F word regularly, and I told him,
And they're not gay.
Regularly.
Like today.
yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, you got to stop doing that. He's like, yeah, but he's like, I don't mean nothing bad. I'm just like, and I was like, yo, you got to stop saying that. I was like, you shouldn't be saying it to me. You shouldn't be saying it at all. And he was like, yo, if you're not gay, why do you care? I'm like, it doesn't matter if I'm gay or not. And we did this for about an hour, and I mean, it felt like an hour and a half. I'm like, it doesn't matter how I feel about it. I'm telling you, there's a marginalized community out there, and that word is weaponized against them. And them using it is solely different from the way you're using it. And I know your perspective on the LGBT community, so I know you have no business.
And
Yeah, exactly.
And you need people outside of your community
Yeah.
to vouch for you
Yeah.
when you're not there and to speak to their community. Because
Yeah.
my white friends, I'm like, bro, you woke as hell when we talking, but I are you keeping that same energy when
Yes.
it's just y'all?
Yes.
And I don't know that a lot of people are. I think it's easy
And
to.
I can say that there's 50-50 on that community.
Yeah.
There's some people
Yeah.
resistant. Some people are very much like, oh, I can say this around you because you're
Right. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're us.
Yeah.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
thing is like
I hate
there-
that. I would shut it down instantly because I'm like,
Well, thank you.
it's practice.
Like genuinely,
Shut it down.
because I don't think a lot of people do. So I appreciate that shit because
Yeah, well,
it's easy to be woke in front of everybody. Not so
It's
much
easy-
at Thanksgiving dinner. I feel like a
Well,
lot
the
of
thing
people
is,
aren't as
like,
woke.
That's the
that's
scary thing, is that-
super annoying about it
Is
is
that
that so much of wokeness
Yeah.
is performative. It is to get,
Yeah.
like, social capital, just be like, oh, look, I'm woke.
And like
Right?
celebrities see the value of it now, so like they're all
It's a trend.
they're all
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, this
Yeah.
thing's crazy, and they go back to
It's like, let
Not
me,
giving a
like,
shit.
have my Oscar speech be about, like, feminism and the environment and shit. You're
It's
just
not
like,
a trend. It's a
are you serious?
protective survival mechanism. It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, people are going to hate you.
Yeah, you're getting
So-
canceled. You're getting canceled accidentally, and
So-
you're never gonna even know why. Like,
Exactly.
how far back should this shit go though?
What do you mean, how far back?
Like,
like there was a point at which
If you
blackface
ma-
was
if
cool,
you
and
made
no
a
one was like giving anyone
no, I
shit
mean,
about
like,
it.
do you
right?
have to acknowledge when things were okay or seemed okay? Like if you were dropping the F word in your album in '98,
Yeah. I think you have to address it. Address
what
the fact that
happens?
you don't believe
Yeah.
that's...
like you have to allow
We all
people
went to
to
college
grow.
together too.
Nice.
Because
Okay.
Charlamagne Guy says if in today's culture, Malcolm Little would have never been allowed to become Malcolm X
Facts.
because they would have just held him accountable for the shit he did when he was young, and anything he said after maturing and having a new
Yeah.
perspective would have been invalidated. No, fuck that. In '93, you said I don't believe that anymore.
Did he write it down? Did he put it on Twitter? Because I feel like that's totally different from
But I
saying
mean, like Jay, in Reasonable Doubt, he was dropping the F word.
that's true, but he's still allowed to be a billionaire and be an influencer. So
Which, I mean, shit,
And get an award
In
from the
practice, that's-
LGBT
should he be punished for saying that in
organization.
'95?
punished. Is he being punished?
No, I'm asking, should he? Because or Kevin Hart for the tweets.
Who was punished?
You have to be accountable.
Yeah.
He
You
only
have to
lost.
address it.
He technically wasn't punished. They asked him to apologize. He refused to do it, and then he withdrew his own name.
Well, I get
from
to
doing
that point. How
Yeah.
So I'm
do
like,
you have
there was
to
no
continue
real
to apologize?
I think you should.
Because he said I already
I think you
apologized,
should.
and I'm like, that's kind of a weak excuse, but
Yeah.
It's also, like, not that hard.
It was a very low. There was
Such
a
a low
low.
bar.
Yeah, exactly. Like all he had to do was like, "Hey, I'm sorry. See y'all at the Oscars."
I'm still sorry.
Yeah.
I'm still sorry, y'all.
Which
In case
still
I was
would
wondering.
like,
Yeah.
you know what, my
But
friend.
what if it keeps coming up every interview? Are you allowed to say, you know what, I already addressed
I
it?
think that people will get tired of it.
Yeah,
just
eventually
themselves.
they'll stop
You know,
Now?
it's like beat a
I
dead
think
horse.
people love that shit.
Well, it's the
Right.
They
controversy.
love saying, you did this.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I talked about that 3 interviews today. Can we talk about something else?
There's,
Or is that
there's
just,
definitely
no!
going to be some people who are going to talk about it forever, but I think most people move on from shit, right? It's just not new, interesting content. You know?
Most people aren't the
But
loud
nobody
ones
would
on
be
the internet.
talking about it if he just apologized.
If
Nobody
he
would be
just
talking
no,
about it.
exactly.
So,
Like no one will be talking
you know,
about
like if he said like they bring it up and then he's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry,
I
I said
think
that.
it
Then
would've
nobody,
just
there's no
become
other
a
like
non-issue.
conversation. It's just like, oh well, he said sorry, so we don't need to bring that up again.
Yeah.
I think so.
I mean,
But
I
also,
think
you're
so.
you're all really rational people, and the internet.
Yeah, I was like, the internet doesn't work that way.
People just
Yeah.
people just go crazy. You get so much hate mail, and imagine like, yeah, the silent majority believes you're okay, but you're getting 1,000,
People
DMs
like-
Well, that's
about
what's
how much
crazy
shit
is that
I-
so many people's like entire careers now are predicated on nothing but their reputation and what the public thinks of them, and the public is not like a very good judge of anything. They're just swinging a machete
They're
around.
bored. Yeah, they're like,
Like-
who can? Yeah, it's the angry village people. Who can
They're
we fuck
not
up today?
like evaluating the evidence, right? They're just like if they want to kill someone, like they don't give a shit.
And
Right?
we're looking for opportunities to,
It's
what was
fun,
it? Twitter
right?
Twitter described as a game where the only goal is to not be the person picked each day. Yeah. One person's picked
Well, that's why I deleted all my undergrad tweets.
Oh, I did the same thing. I deleted
because
everything
I-
from before 2015.
I know
How do
what.
you do that? Just
and
research
if you
purposes.
were
Something called delete tweet. I'll send it.
were y'all on Twitter around like 09?
Yeah.
It was
Crazy
it
times.
Just cut
We were
everything.
wilding on that
Certain
shit like every day. 2009 Twitter. We were just going crazy.
Oh.
I can't be held accountable.
I deleted all of that. I was like, I'm
I made
serious. I was like,
a new account, new handle. I was like, no, because that guy was fucking stupid.
Yeah.
He was only saying shit to get a reaction. Shit he didn't believe.
Yeah.
But they could pull that shit up if I ever like ran for office. I
I had
mean,
mixtapes when I was in high school. Oh my, we used to just freestyle. Freestyle and you just say what rhymes.
I'm okay with that. Like, I feel like most of that stuff is. I feel like the if you've seen the people that come back from all of that stuff, it's typically all the people that own it. Like, yes, I said that. Clearly, I don't mean it now. I'm sorry. And then just every time someone asks them, yes, I said that. Clearly, I don't mean it now. I'm sorry. And you say it every time. I mean, if you're willing to do that, it's really hard for them to indict you and to continue to indict you unless they have evidence that you still think that now, like Paula Dean. Where it's like, you said the N-word then, you also said it last week.
I mean, who was shocked Paula D was talking about?
Yeah, I'm like,
your whole
that
demeanor.
accent, I was like, I know you said the N-word.
Whole demeanor was plantation, like from jump. I was like, ah, we know what you thought about.
Like, you always frying something and like hanging something.
Where'd y'all get that recipe? You know y'all didn't make that shit.
all those media personalities that rest on their reputations, they're not always the smartest people in the room.
No.
Oh.
They're actually sometimes they're really stupid.
They're often never the smartest.
It's kind of their charm.
Well, that's
They
what
don't
makes
talk
people
down to
famous,
people.
right?
Yeah, right.
Yo, I gotta get out of here.